over the last few years, the deer population has really exploded in many areas where years ago we never had to deal with deer eating some of our plants. Now we might have to deal with it. And for example, I have a few herbs here in front of me, and in some cases deer really like certain types. But on the other hand, some of your very fragrant plants like your basil that has a real pungent scent to it, maybe even your oregano, and maybe even your rosemary really may help keep deer away from certain parts of your home. Now, deer can sense plants and the fragrance from long distances. They don't have to come right up to a basil and taste it before they find they don't like it. But so if you fill your garden with some of these herbs and many other plants I'll talk about, maybe for example even something like lantana, which is an annual, or really a tender annual, you put all those things in your garden, and in the long run, it'll help reduce deer from coming to those certain parts that they really would like to. Deer feeding in your garden is dependent upon a few things. First of all, how many plants do you have that they love? The other thing, keep in mind, deer some years will feed on certain plants and maybe other years not. It depends on how many deer are out in your garden and what other food sources they're feeding on. During drought years, they would virtually eat almost all plants in the garden since there was nothing outside your garden for them to feed upon. But there are plants that you can use and fill your gardens with, like the fall blooming Japanese anemone or the windflower, which blooms in summer and fall. Deer definitely don't like it. Even our native American holly, now this is a hybrid called Merry Christmas, and deer do not like to feed upon this type of holly, where on other hollies they may feed upon them. Getting back to pungent plants and strong odored plants, things like your chrysanthemum, which bloom in the late summer and fall, has a strong fragrance, and deer will rarely eat this plant. But on the other hand here, we might have plants that they love, like the yew. Yews are common in foundation plantings, and deer will come right up to the house and feed upon and shred this plant. But on the other hand, you might consider integrating something in your garden like the common boxwood, Boxwood semperflorens. For those of us who garden in the shade or bright shade where you might find a few more deer, you might consider planting some ferns. Now, these ferns mainly include our native ferns that grow up in the mountains and in some of the open valleys. The beautiful wood fern gets about 36 inches tall. Then we have the variegated Japanese painted fern from Asia, which deer really don't like. And one of my favorite ferns, which comes up with this beautiful pinkish red foliage, is the Japanese sword fern, and then it turns green. And in many of our areas that we hike, especially our Blue Ridge Mountains and Appalachian Mountains, you're going to see the beautiful native Christmas fern growing in open and rocky areas. And then we have the tassel fern, which is almost a tropical fern in the way that it looks. And the more you fill your garden with deer-resistant plants, the more it will prevent them from coming to feast on your plants. You can eventually replace their favorite plants with plants they don't eat, like the ornamental grasses. And here, this is the pampas grass. This is the hardy pampas grass. Has a real, in fact, it'll cut you if you're not careful when you're working with this plant, a sharp leaf. And then we have the miscanthus, and they vary in, leaves this big, or in this case, little zebra, very small leaves, and they're really sharp, and deer really do not eat these. So you can fill your garden with these grasses. Here is Russian sage. This group of plants, or the sage family, including salvias, really are great for the garden. This blooms for 3 months in the garden. Deer do not like this plant at all. I'm Mark Viette. Join me next time in the garden.
For more garden tips, go to the In the Garden website, inthegardenradio.com.